It was a long, hot summer night at Iowa Speedway. Weather delays made it so that the race ended around 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And for those of you who are watching in Europe or maybe somewhere else in a different time zone that's worse than the East Coast of the United States, it was a very late night / early morning for you to watch this race. And I have to admit, a little bit of a bias right off the bat is that I absolutely adore Indy cars on a short oval track. It's one of my favorite forms of motorsport. I actually liken it a bit to endurance sports car racing, and that's also why I kind of understand why some people don't get it, so to speak, what the appeal is. You have a lot of speed differences between the cars. You're not going to have 20, 25 cars finish on the lead lap in a short oval IndyCar race. It's just not the nature of the beast. You have cars going multiple different speeds. You have comers and goers, and you have a lot of lap traffic. And ultimately, it results in very few cars finishing on the lead lap. And more often than not, you see one or maybe two guys have incredibly dominant performances. But all those factors kind of create quite a bit of action, even if it's not necessarily at the front of the field. So I definitely enjoyed this race, and if I were IndyCar right now, I would be on the phone with Richmond, Loudon, and Milwaukee to try to bring some races back, because I really enjoyed this one, especially because they upped the horsepower to the road course boost levels, so somewhere around 700, 750 horsepower were on tap for the IndyCar drivers, and because they ran it so late at night, the drivers were talking about some 200 to 300 extra pounds of downforce, and we definitely saw that on the start of the race. And Santino Ferrucci is kind of quickly becoming the one-man highlight show, because on the start he made up something like 7 or 8 positions going around the outside, and also later on in the race on one of the restarts, again Santino Ferrucci was making a big move, making up a ton of positions. Again, say what you want about Santino, and some of it is very legitimate, but the guy is clearly developing into a very talented race car driver, specifically in IndyCar, and love him or hate him, he's going to be around for a while, I suspect, because I don't think Europe is going to take him back, and it certainly seems like in all the interviews he's given that he's having quite a bit of fun here, and his driving is definitely kind of indicating that. And oftentimes, like we've kind of said, he didn't do it in Iowa, but more often than not this season he's been outperforming his teammate Sebastian Bourdais, and I think there's something to be said about that. It was a bad night for the boys from Nazareth, Pennsylvania, we'll put it that way. Sage Karam was involved in 2 separate accidents in his second race for the Carlin team, his return to actual non-Indy 500 IndyCar racing in quite a long time, both Toronto and Iowa. The first crash was with Felix Rosenquist, essentially ruining both of their races, and then later on he made contact with Takuma Sato. That one wasn't really his fault. Sato got out of the groove, and Sage ran over the back of him. And it was kind of unfortunate to see, but kind of not really unexpected. And this is nothing against Sage, but if you've been out of the seat for that long, you're bound to have some rust, and I think that's probably what it was. That being said, I think Sage has had one of the faster cars in terms of lap times overall at both Toronto and Iowa. So he's clearly still got the talent, and hopefully we'll be seeing him for a couple more races this season, especially now that Pato O'Ward is no longer in the 31 Carlin car. You would hope that Sage will get a few more opportunities and maybe be able to put together something for next season. But unfortunately, the real Nazareth, Pennsylvania part of this that was, I think we need to talk about it now, because I've kind of been beating around the bush the last couple of weeks because he's been getting some top 10s and we've been able to talk about him. But Marco Andretti. And I'm not a Marco Andretti apologist, but I also wouldn't say that I am super, super cynical about Marco Andretti. I'm not one of those people who's like, he's got to retire, he sucks, because I don't believe that's true. I believe there is quite a bit of racing talent. Marco Andretti, I've seen it with my own 2 eyes. I was in the stands in the 2006 Indy 500. I've seen Marco Andretti driving at a very high level. I know he can do it. So seeing especially these oval performances from Marco this year, very concerning and just kind of out of left field. And I don't know if I don't want to just say, oh, it's the car or oh, it's not the car. But my suggestion at this point would maybe, if not sit out a race, like sit out Gateway or maybe one of the practice sessions at Gateway or Pocono, put somebody like Oriol Servia in the car and see if there's something wrong with the current oval setup. Because it 2 races in a row. I mean, he was fairly on pace at Texas, but Indianapolis and Iowa, I mean, he was 5 or 6 or 7 laps down in both races. And I mean, when you're in a car that's theoretically the same as the one Alexander Rossi is driving at the front every weekend, there is something seriously wrong. And again, I don't want to be, because again, I like Marco. I think he's talented, but at some point you've got to put up or shut up, or you've got to find out what the problem is. And it's just, and again, I don't want to be too hard on him, because if you look at where the rest of the Andretti Autosport drivers finished, save for Rossi, Veach was 7th, and in fact drove a really good race. We'll talk about him later. But Ryan Hunter-Reay was 17th. So was Andretti Autosport just not quite clicking on all cylinders? But how does that explain Indy? I don't know. Marco's career, there's going to need to be something done at some point very soon, because these kind of performances, man, I don't think they make anybody look good. I don't think they're good for Marco in his confidence. They're not good for his confidence either. So, yeah, again, I think my suggestion would be put somebody else in the car, figure out what's going on, and hopefully figure out a solution. And of course, on that opposite end of the Andretti Autosport spectrum, I guess you could say, Alexander Rossi, again, an amazing save. And people are actually getting annoyed at me in the comments of these IndyCar videos because I keep talking about Rossi and how great he is. I'll stop talking about Rossi, people, when Rossi stops giving me a reason to talk about how great he is. I mean, I think this is his best save yet. And he was more sideways, and I looked at the footage, the gateways near spin last year, and then as well as the Texas sideways deal at, where he avoided Colton Herta. He was more sideways in this one. I mean, he keeps getting more and more sideways in these incidents, and he doesn't crash. I can't even remember. I think the last time Rossi had a legitimate crash was like testing in Phoenix, like 3 years ago. I do not understand. I mean, this is something, again, if I'm in the marketing department at IndyCar, I'm pushing this so hard because there's literally no one else in the world who can get an IndyCar that sideways at that speed and not crash it. I mean, Rossi is just on a different planet sometimes, and it's just so unbelievable to see it, to kind of live in this era where there is a driver like this. And he's just the show. And anybody who's doesn't have a favorite driver, who tunes into an IndyCar race, I'd be hard-pressed to believe that they are picking anybody but Rossi when they see stuff like this. He's just so exciting to watch. And quite frankly, it's really great for the sport to have somebody who's able to do crazy, unbelievable things every single race. Yeah, again, just amazing. Also amazing, Team Penske. This was, it was kind of the grass is green, water is wet, and Joseph Newgarden dominates Iowa. But really, it was Team Penske domination. They have had something on the short ovals for quite a while, just above everybody else. It's got to be the shocks and the shock program, obviously. But, they were 3 miles per hour with Simon Pagenaud faster than the rest of the field. It was a 1-2-3 sweep in qualifying. And for a little while, even though Takuma Sato made some moves on the start, it looked like it was going to be 1-2-3 in the race. Now, Will Power, who was the closest challenger to Joseph Newgarden, actually led quite a bit of the opening segment of the race. He made a mistake in the pits, getting into the pits, and was given a penalty. That took him completely out of contention, in fact, completely out of the top 10. Obviously, when you have to make a pit stop under green on a short oval, you're going to lose quite a few laps, and that's exactly what happened to him. But again, Joseph Newgarden at Iowa is just so dominant. But he almost lost the race to Scott Dixon. And yes, Dixon benefited from the wave around rule. I've beaten that dead horse that the IndyCar wave around rule is worse than the NASCAR lucky dog by a long way. Okay. Dixon was, I think, 1 or 2 laps down and through the yellows, specifically the final yellow. Even though it didn't give him his lap back, it definitely was a godsend to him. He got laps back because of the yellows. And then because of Ed Carpenter's crash towards the end of the race, Dixon was able to make a pit stop for fresh tires. And as we know, at Iowa, specifically if you remember the 2014 race where Ryan Hunter-Reay essentially stole a win from Tony Kanaan on fresh tires, you would have thought that everybody would have come into the pits, but it was very few people. I think it was just Rossi and Dixon that came in for tires, and they were the guys who were coming on the restart. And, Dixon got all the way up to second, couldn't challenge Newgarden. Of course, Newgarden was completely in clean air, didn't have to deal with a whole lot of traffic, but Dixon was, 2 seconds behind him. And this is kind of like, it's like the Jaws theme. You get the little, like the shark in the water. Dixon is staying in this championship hunt. He's still less than 100 points out, and that's what you need for the double points finale at Laguna Seca. And, Dixon could win another championship just by, again, being Scott Dixon and just having incredible skill, incredible luck, and when he's dominant, he's absolutely dominant. So let's talk about the top 10 in this race because it was quite a bit of a different top 10 than we've kind of been used to in recent races. So Joseph Newgarden, of course, won and did what he needed to do, of course, finish ahead of Rossi. Not as many positions as I think Newgarden would have wanted to finish ahead of Rossi, but I think he still got 29 or 34 points, somewhere around there as a buffer. And this is kind of the last race where Joseph Newgarden, I think, is going to have a distinct advantage over Alexander Rossi for the bulk of the championship coming up. If you look at the races coming up, you've got Mid-Ohio, which Rossi dominated and won last year, Pocono, which Rossi dominated and won last year, Gateway, where Rossi finished second. Then you go to Portland, where Rossi was very fast, got caught out on pit strategy, Sato won, and then Laguna Seca, which no one has any data for, but you would imagine that Rossi would be very good there. So, with the exception of maybe Gateway, because of course we know Joseph won the kind of return race to Gateway, I have to feel like the bulk of the championship favors Rossi. So, kind of the strategy for Joseph is going to be just keep Rossi in your sights and don't let him. If Rossi is winning races, you've got to finish second and capitalize when you can. But Joseph has been driving like a champion this year. It'll be interesting to see how this kind of plays out down the stretch. Speaking of kind of waiting in the wings to pounce has been Scott Dixon. Like I said, he's less than 100 points out. He continues to just be there. And I feel like if anything happens to Newgarden and Rossi, he's going to be the guy that is going to be waiting around to pounce. James Hinchcliffe had a great day. Defending winner of this race. Of course, last year it was in the day. This year it was in the night. But once again, James Hinchcliffe had a great race, and it was his first podium of the year, believe it or not. Kind of strange to think. Simon Pagenaud was the pole sitter. He certainly did very well in Toronto with the victory there. But, Simon didn't have the best day. It looked like they kind of missed the setup, missed the adjustments in the middle of the race. He wasn't as good in traffic as Joseph Newgarden, and I think that was really the difference between those two cars. Spencer Piggott on the lead lap in an Ed Carpenter car. Ed Carpenter's team actually had a really good race outside of Ed actually putting it on the wall. Piggott has really kind of come into his own on the ovals. Not really a surprise considering the team he drives for, but it seems like every time they go to an oval, Piggott is right up there. Alexander Rossi, this is definitely the race that I think Rossi was the most worried about, and he comes out on the lead lap, salvaging some points, not too far behind Joseph Newgarden, and certainly he wasn't in the wall or out of the race for one reason or another, and that's exactly what he needed to do. Like I mentioned earlier, the rest of the schedule heavily favors Rossi, so really he's just got to be Rossi, and I think Rossi will win the championship at this point, given how things played out last year, how well he's suited to the tracks coming up. I think it favors Rossi. Not saying Newgarden's going to lose it by any stretch of the imagination. It's probably going to be very close. Zach Veach was the final car on the lead lap in 7th, and really a solid day for Zach Veach. Again, when you look at, again, where his teammates finished outside of Rossi, you've got Hunter Ray way down the field and Marco out with handling problems. So when you consider Zach Veach, got on the lead lap and stayed there, I mean, that's a solid run for him, and it'll be kind of, we're going to have to, eventually he's going to have to perform, start becoming a race-winning contender, but again, he's got the sponsorship, and he's really got, I guess he's kind of got the peace of mind where he can just kind of develop slowly and build up to winning. I don't think he's quite in as pressure-packed of a situation as maybe some other drivers are because of just how stable everything is around him, and that's a great position to be in. Graham Rahal finished 8th with a burned-out motor. Apparently, he was burning a piston. It's kind of surprising that the engine didn't blow up. Unfortunately, it did blow up for Colton Herta. So we did see some reliability issues again from Honda, which was kind of surprising, but I guess not really, since we've seen them really be blowing up on the road course, and they were running the road course boost at this race. But he managed to nurse it home, and he actually beat the next guy to the finish line, Sebastian Bourdais, who finished a lap down and finally, once this season, actually he's done it a couple times this season, beat his teammate Santino Ferrucci to the line. Bourdais is a pretty good short oval racer. We, of course, remember the 2015 race where he virtually lapped the field at Milwaukee. It just didn't seem to go Sebastian's way. He almost unlapped himself from Joseph on the restart. That was pretty interesting. And then 10th, guess what? It was Tony Kanaan. One of the best results, not only for Kanaan this year, I think it is the best result for Kanaan this year. I don't think he even got a top 10 at Indy. But it's also, I think it's the second best result for Foyt this year, because Matheus Leist finished 4th in the rain race at Indy on the GP course. I think this is the second best result for the Foyt team. That's not a great commentary, but yeah, the Foyt team is even more of a baffling thing than the Andretti, the Marco thing, because I don't even know what to say about the Foyt thing. Good job on the top 10. And I think going mid-Ohio is going to be a bloodbath for Foyt, but Pocono might, and I always say that might. It seems like the Foyt cars always fall out within the first 20 laps of Pocono, but seeing as that race is sponsored by ABC Supply, you'd hope that the Foyt team would perform there, but they might not. So, that was Iowa. I hope you've enjoyed my analysis of the race. If you did, be sure to subscribe for more IndyCar and motorsport content. This has been David Land on YouTube, and I will see you in the next video.